The Florida sun beat down on the dense woodland flanking Route 75. Beneath the surface of that deceptive tranquility, the earth held its breath, guarding a grim secret. The highway, a pulsing artery of life and movement, had borne silent witness to an unspeakable horror. Twisted branches, gnarled by time and weather, reached out like skeletal fingers, casting long, eerie shadows across the asphalt. The air, thick with humidity and the scent of pine needles, carried a disquieting stillness. The silence was finally broken, shattered by a discovery that sent chills down the spines of seasoned law enforcement officers. The first body surfaced like a macabre offering from the depths of the Florida swamps. It lay sprawled amidst the reeds and waterlogged vegetation, a gruesome testament to a violent end. Fear, cold and insidious, began to seep through the community, wrapping its icy fingers around the hearts of the locals. The victims, all men, were linked by their transient lifestyles, their paths converging on the lonely stretches of Route 75. As the body count rose, so did the questions. Law enforcement agencies from across the state pooled their resources, determined to bring the killer to justice. The investigation ultimately led to a woman named Eileen Wuornos, a name that would become synonymous with one of the most chilling chapters in American criminal history. Aileen was a hitchhiker, a prostitute, a woman who knew the harsh realities of life on the streets. Born in Michigan in 1956, Aileen's childhood was a brutal introduction to the world's cruelty. Abandoned by her parents, she was left to navigate the treacherous waters of the foster care system, where she endured both physical and sexual abuse. As a teenager, she fled the only home she had ever known, seeking solace in the transient world of hitchhiking and prostitution. Her life was a series of fleeting encounters, a blur of truck stops, cheap motels, and the ever-present threat of violence. When confronted with the evidence against her, Aileen didn't shy away from the accusations. She confessed to the murders, but her admissions came with a chilling caveat. She claimed she had taken the lives of those men in self-defense. According to Aileen, each of the men had picked her up while she was working as a prostitute, and each had attempted to sexually assault her. Driven by fear and fueled by years of pent-up rage, she fought back, her actions culminating in their deaths. The prosecution scoffed at her claims, portraying her as a cold-blooded killer who preyed on unsuspecting men. The courtroom became a battleground for competing narratives, a stage where Aileen's life was dissected and scrutinized. To understand Aileen Wuornos, one must delve into the wreckage of her past, to unearth the roots of her rage and despair. Born into poverty and neglect, Aileen's childhood was a brutal tapestry of abandonment, abuse, and profound loneliness. Her father, a diagnosed schizophrenic, was in and out of prison, while her mother, overwhelmed and ill-prepared for motherhood, abandoned Aileen and her brother when she was just 4 years old. Shuffled between foster homes and relatives, Aileen never experienced the stability and security of a loving family. Instead, she encountered a string of temporary caregivers, some well-intentioned but ill-equipped to deal with her emotional baggage, others downright abusive. By the time she reached adolescence, Aileen was already deeply scarred, her spirit crushed by years of neglect and trauma. She sought solace in fleeting relationships, engaging in risky sexual behavior, her actions a desperate cry for attention and affection. Aileen's case ignited a fierce debate. Was she a cold-blooded predator who deserved the harshest punishment? Or was she a deeply troubled victim, driven to extreme measures by a life marred by abuse and exploitation? The prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting the brutality of the murders and the calculated nature of her crimes. They argued that Aileen was a manipulative liar who used her sexuality to lure men to their deaths, her actions driven by a deep-seated hatred of men. The defense, on the other hand, painted a more nuanced portrait of Aileen, urging the jury to look beyond the sensational headlines and consider the totality of her experiences. They argued that her crimes, however horrific, were a desperate attempt to break free from a cycle of victimhood that had haunted her since childhood. The jury, tasked with the impossible task of peering into the depths of Aileen's soul, ultimately sided with the prosecution, finding her guilty and sentencing her to death. Aileen Wuornos' case was a legal minefield, a complex web of legal precedents, societal biases, and the ever-present shadow of the death penalty. Her court-appointed attorneys faced an uphill battle from the start, tasked with defending a client who is demonized in the media and viewed with suspicion by the public. The prosecution, armed with forensic evidence and Aileen's own confessions, presented a compelling case, portraying her as a calculating killer who deserved the ultimate punishment. The defense team, however, faced a daunting task, humanizing a woman who had become a symbol of female aggression and violence. They sought to introduce evidence of Aileen's troubled past, arguing that her history of abuse and mental illness mitigated her culpability. The jury, tasked with weighing the evidence and rendering a verdict, faced an unenviable task, determining the fate of a woman whose life was a tragic tapestry of victimhood and violence. As Aileen's legal battles raged on, her mental state deteriorated, her grip on reality becoming increasingly tenuous. Years of untreated trauma, coupled with the stress of her legal situation and the relentless scrutiny of the media, took a devastating toll on her psyche. She experienced vivid hallucinations, claiming that prison guards were torturing her with sonic weapons and lacing her food with poison. Mental health professionals who examined Aileen diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, conditions characterized by emotional instability, impulsivity, and a distorted sense of self. They argued that her crimes, while horrific, were a tragic manifestation of her mental illness, a desperate attempt to exert control over a world that had always seemed chaotic and threatening. Despite the mounting evidence of her deteriorating mental state, Aileen's claims of mental illness were met with skepticism by both the prosecution and the court. In a move that surprised many, Aileen decided to drop all remaining appeals and expedite her execution. She fired her attorneys, accusing them of conspiring against her, and declared that she was ready to face her fate. Some speculated that she was tired of the legal battles, weary of the constant scrutiny and the dehumanizing conditions of prison life. In her final days, Aileen granted a series of interviews, offering a glimpse into her troubled mind and expressing a mix of remorse and defiance. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. Her case sparked a national debate about the death penalty, the role of mental illness in criminal justice, and the complex interplay of victimhood and violence.